Hello everyone, welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, all three of Ivarage's subordinates were defeated. However, with Milim and Chloe falling in battle, Ivarage descended upon the battlefield once more, and the course of the war became uncertain again. In this episode, we will see Feldway's dramatic transformation from the shadowy mastermind behind the Tenma Great War into the vanguard opposing the creator god Veldanava. Of course, defying a god came at a price, standing on the brink of death. And at that critical moment, the one who saved Feldway was, without question, that utterly ridiculous slime. So, let's get started. Let's firstly shift our perspective to Dino's group. After meeting with Feldway at the Star Palace, Dino, Pico, and Gracia quickly moved to the skies above the battlefield. Since Star Palace was located directly above Heaven Tower, the actual distance between them was not far. This was precisely the moment when Milim was knocked down to the ground by Ivarage. Upon learning of Milim's defeat, Dino was consumed by rage and prepared to fall under Benimaru's command to carry out a rescue. At that moment, Feldway caught up to them and forcibly blocked their path. By this point, the Dino trio had effectively broken with Feldway completely, and they did not hold back their harsh words. Seeing the leader of the Seven Angels of Origin pursuing them, Dino's group responded with extreme coldness, openly displaying their irritation and unloading a barrage of criticism at Feldway. Feldway, however, completely ignored their hostility. This was one of his flaws, but sometimes it was also his strength, as he continued the conversation on his own terms. Although they switched to thought communication to save time, Dino and the others remained deeply impatient, viewing Feldway as nothing more than an incomprehensible obstruction. The core issue was obvious: the revival of the creator god, Veldanava. Feldway raised a question that stunned everyone: whether Dino truly believed that Veldanava wished to see the world in its current state, when Pico countered with, "What if the god hasn't revived at all?" Feldway reiterated his almost delusional plan. If the god truly was absent, then Feldway wanted to reset everything, rebuild a perfect utopia, and wait for the god's return. But his true contradiction lay elsewhere. If the god had already revived, why had he not stopped the current destruction? Dino sighed and admitted that he shared the same doubts. Part of it was intuition, and part of it was the undeniable evidence on the battlefield: Ivarage wearing Lucia's face. Of course, there was still the possibility suggested by Pico and Gracia that Ivarage had devoured the sacred remains of both Veldanava and Lucia. But no matter how they considered it, the situation seemed far more likely to be heading in the direction Dino feared most: that Veldanava had indeed revived and had allowed Ivarage to don Lucia's body. For those with the sharpest instincts, Dino and Feldway alike, this suspicion had already taken root deep within their hearts. That was where the true problem lay. If Veldanava had revived and genuinely desired the destruction of the world, what was Feldway supposed to do? Feldway had always believed that a servant should obey without question. Yet he suddenly realized that, deep down, he could not accept a god who would allow the world to be destroyed. At last, he understood something crucial. If that were the case, then the god he loved might no longer exist. The Veldanava he revered was a creator who cherished life and respected free will. If the being before them was a destroyer, then he was not the master Feldway had waited for. Even if he had truly revived, he was no longer the same person. It was only then that Feldway finally understood Dino's earlier accusations, that it was Feldway who had betrayed everyone first. He had stripped his companions of their free will and imposed his own obsession upon them. That, truly, was the unforgivable sin. Feldway did not apologize on the spot, because he knew that words alone could never atone for his past crimes. He longed to be accepted by his comrades again, but first he had to prove himself. His chosen path to redemption was clear. He would take responsibility for bringing Ivarage into the Central World, while Dino and the others went to rescue Milim. With that resolve, Feldway turned and prepared to charge toward the monster, capable of destroying the world. At last, Feldway emerged from the maze of his obsession. He was no longer a madman bent on annihilating the world, but the leader of the 7 angels of origin, someone seeking to correct his mistakes and protect the faith he truly believed in. However, fate seemed unwilling to grant him that chance at redemption. At the very moment Feldway resolved to confront Ivarage, a voice stopped him. Immediately after, a dazzling figure manifested out of thin air. The newcomer bore the same face as Feldway, though the coloration was subtly different. The true difference lay in presence. If Feldway was an imitation, then this being was the unquestionable original. His overwhelming aura crushed the surrounding space, even warping the light itself. There was no doubt. This was the Star King Dragon, Veldanava, in person. Instinctively, Feldway performed the highest salute of the 7 angels of origin in midair. Standing perfectly upright, spine straight, head slightly bowed, right hand over his heart, left hand resting at his waist, even the angle of his wings aligned with absolute precision. Dino, Pico, and Gracia followed suit. No one questioned the authenticity of the god before them, for the radiance of his soul was absolute. Yet, upon seeing the long-awaited revival of his lord, what welled up in Feldway's heart was not joy, but profound sorrow and confusion. The god's plan was to allow Ivarage to act freely, using this evil god to select the central world, destroying everything that failed to meet divine standards and preserving only those deemed worthy. In truth, this plan was no different from Feldway's own former madness of wanting to wipe out the world entirely. Hearing this command, Feldway finally saw his own heart clearly. His past rampage had been nothing more than the tantrum of a willful child. Deep down, he had always hoped that someone would stop his foolishness. Now that he sought to turn back and correct his mistakes, the god himself intended to carry out that very plan of destruction. The irony was devastating. While Feldway was still trapped in turmoil, Dino was the first to step forward. Dino openly opposed the destruction of the world, arguing that the current world was stable and functioning well, and that restoring peace by eliminating Ivarage was the correct course of action. Veldanava tilted his head, as if he could not comprehend why anyone would object. He sighed and remarked that Velzard had once opposed him as well, but she had presented conditions. She wished to bring the people she had frozen along with her to the new world, and Veldanava had accepted her request. That was why Velzard had ultimately cooperated with the god's plan. At the same time, Veldanava looked at Dino with the detached gaze one would reserve for a broken tool, and calmly stated that the 7 angels of origin were, from the beginning, nothing more than tools he had created. Yes, there was no obligation for a god to tolerate defiance from his tools. Feldway instantly sensed the danger. He shouted and tried to shove Dino away, but he was too late. A flash of light pierced straight through Dino's chest. Feldway immediately ordered Pico and Gracia to retreat with Dino as fast as possible. In that moment he regained the bearing of a seraphim. His 2 subordinates obeyed through tears, escorting the critically wounded Dino toward the ground. Only Feldway and Veldanava remained on the battlefield. When confronted with the question of loyalty to his god, Feldway gave the bravest answer of his life. He swore that his loyalty had always belonged to his lord, but he had finally realized that blind obedience was wrong. When a master errs, it is the duty of a subordinate to advise, to remonstrate, and even to stop him. Feldway admitted that Obera, Zalario, and Dino had been right all along. Through tears, Feldway saw the truth. The god before him possessed a pure and flawless soul, an absolute power, yet lacked love. The moment Lucia was lost, the god's core had been wounded, and he had forgotten how to love. To prevent his lord from committing an irredeemable mistake, Feldway chose to save this lost god. Bearing wounds that had yet to heal after his defeat by Diablo, Feldway charged towards the creator he revered most, the very one he wished to save, launching a challenge that was doomed to end in despair. Let's return our perspective to the Heaven Tower battlefield. The rescue of Milim had been swift and successful, Yet no one felt relieved. Ivarage had not even attempted to stop them. She had discarded Milim as if tossing aside trash. Yes, Ivarage did not regard anyone present as worthy of notice, including Milim, who had been considered one of the strongest beings alive. That realization struck the entire battlefield harder than anything else. Ivarage's power was so absurd that even Veldora felt a flicker of fear. Of course, the mocking pressure radiating from Velgrind behind him felt even more terrifying. Left with no choice, Veldora braced himself and stepped forward, all the while desperately hoping that Rimuru would arrive soon to turn the tide. Luminous healed Milim's external wounds, but she could not restore her depleted source energy. When Milim activated her ultimate skill, Lord of Wraith, and entered Stampede mode, she could draw limitless energy from the outside and recover from any expenditure. In her current state, however, her recovery speed was far slower than her consumption. She stubbornly claimed she could still fight, but in reality, she was approaching her limit. Even so, among everyone present, Milim's strength remained in a class of its own. The only ones who could truly stand beside her were Velgrind and Veldora. Velgrind herself had not fully recovered, and together with Testarossa and Obera, she was pushing herself to the brink just to suppress Ivarage's overwhelming aura. Everyone was operating at their absolute limit. Veldora was facing Ivarage alone, and for the moment things seemed manageable. After all, his goal was simply to stall for time. Yet the Chunubu dragon was deeply conflicted. First was his growing fear of Ivarage's constant evolution. Veldora realized that she was learning. She had already learned swordsmanship from Milim and Chloe, and now she was absorbing combat techniques from Veldora himself. If the fight continued like this, there was a real chance he would end up training the enemy, and Rimuru would absolutely tear him apart for it. The second issue was a tactical dilemma. Milim fully understood Ivaraga's intentions and argued for using Dragonova to end the fight instantly. Veldora, however, remained uncharacteristically calm. He knew that while his own techniques were flashy and numerous, none of them could rival the sheer destructive power of Dragonova. But he also knew that even Dragonova would most likely fail. The best option was to wait for Rimuru to arrive. Maintaining the current situation was the optimal strategy. Veldora would act as the punching bag and buy time. Milim rejoining the fight might offer some relief, but the harsh reality was that even together, Milim and Veldora could not shake the current Ivarage. They attempted a coordinated tactic. Veldora launched a feint. Milim circled behind to restrain the enemy, and then Veldora activated the ceiling technique Fertile Paradox to lock Ivarage away. The result was a complete failure. Before Veldora could even finish activating the skill, Ivarage erupted with magic power, blasting Milim away. Veldora had no time to adjust and was slammed into the rock by a sudden punch. Before their eyes, Ivarage was evolving at a visible rate, transforming from a brute that relied solely on raw force into a master tactician, her ability to read the battlefield and seize openings increasing exponentially. Just as the situation was on the verge of total collapse, another sudden twist occurred. A figure fell from the sky and smashed heavily into the battlefield. It was Dino, his chest blown open by a massive hole. Pico and Gracia had escorted him there at the cost of everything they had, terror written all over their faces. Benimaru immediately sensed something was wrong and deployed a barrier to shield the three of them. This unexpected development sent a chill through everyone present. Dino was one of the 7 angels of origin. To reduce him to this state, the attacker could only have been a monster on Ivarage's level or a being on the level of a god. Veldora glanced at the grievously injured Dino, who always shared manga with him in the labyrinth, his eyes sharpening. He knew he had to push himself even harder to stall Ivarage. He could not allow the situation to spiral completely out of control. Internally, Veldora thought to himself that this level of contribution definitely wouldn't be rewarded with just 3 puddings anymore. Luminous swiftly cast holy magic and stabilized Dino's condition. Yet, before anyone could fully react, Before Benimaru even had time to ask what had happened, another figure came crashing down from the sky. This time it was even more dramatic, like a meteor striking the ground and carving out a massive crater. It was Feldway. The once formidable angel's body was already disintegrating, breaking down into particles that drifted away into the air. It was obvious that Feldway's core itself had suffered irreversible damage. The former mastermind behind the Tenma Great War had suddenly fallen into the center of the battlefield, moments away from complete annihilation. For a brief instant, no one truly grasped what was happening, except Dino. Dino urgently asked Feldway whether he, too, had chosen to resist that being. Feldway admitted it with bitter self-mockery. In order to stop the lost god, he had offered up his final act of loyalty, only to be destroyed by that god's own hand. Obera took one look at the scene and instantly understood the truth. Only one being could reduce Feldway to this state, Veldanava-sama. Feldway apologized to his former comrades, admitting that he had utterly failed as their leader. The angel who had clung to obsession for tens of thousands of years seemed to rediscover his true self in his final moments, only for his life to slip away all the same. Faced with everyone's confusion, Dino and Feldway revealed the god's true objective, the regeneration of the world. Veldanava intended to discard this failed creation and build a new world from scratch. Velgrin slowly nodded, as if she had long been mentally prepared for this revelation. This truth was even more despair-inducing than Ivaraga's rampage. After all, their enemy was the creator god himself, the very source of all power. Luminous then posed the sharpest question of all. What would everyone here choose to do? There was no avoiding it. This was a decision of faith. For Benimaru and Hinata, whether they fought gods or mortals made little difference. But for Velgrind and Veldora, their opponent was their own elder brother. An even harsher choice awaited Obera and Zalario, for whom that being was their very creator. As for Luminous, she had already made up her mind. She would never stand by and watch the world she had protected so dearly be destroyed so casually, even if the one responsible was Veldanava-sama himself. Benimaru and Testarossa would, of course, follow only Rimuru-sama's will. Hinata's heart likewise aligned with Luminous. The three of them shared the same conviction. Even a god did not have the right to act without restraint. Velgrin declared that she would follow Masayuki's decision. At that moment, Masayuki heard Rudra's voice echoing deep within his heart, declaring that Veldanava needed to be beaten senseless and brought back to his senses. And so, the strongest couple resolved to fight, for love and for survival. The human alliance reached a consensus. To live, they would have to slay a god. Even with their resolve set, facing the creator god left everyone deeply uneasy. Masayuki activated his trademark empty brain mode to escape reality, but somewhere inside, he felt an inexplicable certainty that things would turn around. His luck stat was operating at full throttle. And then, at last, that familiar, carefree voice everyone longed to hear rang out across the battlefield. Rimuru had arrived. There was no earth-shattering explosion, no overwhelming aura crushing all existence. He appeared calmly, casually, like someone greeting friends after work, right in the middle of a battlefield steeped in despair. Rimuru Tempest had finally made it. In that single greeting, all despair, fear, and confusion melted away. Because everyone knew one simple truth. As long as he was here, there was no problem that couldn't be solved. How had Rimuru arrived? He had been carried over by Diablo via instant teleportation. Rimuru even took a moment to compare internally. Diablo's arms were a bit harder than Sheon's, but at least they were stable. Upon landing, he shifted into human form and greeted everyone like nothing was out of the ordinary. Rimuru felt that even if he was late, offering a greeting while everyone else had been fighting desperately was basic social etiquette, mostly to cover his own awkwardness. But the moment he took in the devastated battlefield, that relaxed mood vanished. Benimaru immediately reported the situation via thought communication. Rimuru learned that Veldora and Milim had been defeated. At that, the two of them instantly jumped into protest, getting beaten up, while stubbornly insisting they hadn't lost. Milim even forced herself upright, declaring she could still fight. Seeing how lively they still were, Rimuru felt reassured. Ivarage was terrifyingly strong, but at least the core forces were still standing. More importantly, Dino and the others had already spread the news that Veldanava had revived and intended to destroy the world, saving Rimuru the trouble of explaining it himself. Next came the problem of Feldway. Feldway lay at the bottom of the impact crater, his body steadily breaking apart, clearly not long for this world. Diablo immediately switched into full taunt mode, mocking how utterly pathetic Feldway looked. Feldway bitterly admitted that he had been a fool, only for Diablo to respond without mercy that realizing his stupidity this late was itself an unforgivable level of dullness. Rimuru complained internally that Diablo was being way too ruthless. Kicking someone when they were already down and calling them stupid to their face was excessive, even if Feldway admittedly had it coming. Dino and the others tried to speak up for Feldway, though it was half scolding and half damage control. After all, the mess Feldway had caused was simply too enormous. At that moment, Zelario arrived as well, and Feldway offered him an apology too. It was the awakening of a soul that had been blinded by obsession for countless ages. Feldway admitted his blindness, admitted that he had misunderstood Veldanava-sama's will, and admitted that he had committed an irreparable mistake. Even so, there was still one wish left in his heart, not for himself, but for his lost master. Feldway wanted to save his lord. That unwavering loyalty, even at the brink of death, left Dino, Obera, and the others in silence. Rimuru watched quietly from the side, but his focus was not on the emotional exchange alone. He looked up toward Veldanava in the sky. The god had not moved at all. Was he waiting for Ivarage to finish cleansing the battlefield, or did he have another plan? Seal warned Rimuru not to let his guard down, but reassured him that no matter what happened, she and Rimuru-sama could handle it. Rimuru understood immediately and heightened his vigilance. He then turned back to Feldway, who tried to stand up only to collapse again. Feldway's arm was already disintegrating. Without intervention, he would certainly be dead within hours. Rimuru did not sympathize with him, but letting him die like this felt like a waste. Rimuru's logic was simple. Feldway wanted to stop Veldanava. Rimuru also needed to stop Veldanava. The enemy of his enemy was, at the very least, a temporary ally, or a useful tool. Rimuru quietly asked Seal in his mind whether Feldway could be saved. Seal replied instantly with a joyful yes. If Seal said it was possible, then it was settled. Rimuru did not give Feldway any room to refuse. He walked up and interrupted Feldway's dramatic, "This is my mission," death monologue. Casually, Rimuru declared that he was now extending a cooperation offer, and saving Feldway in the process. Until Veldanava was dealt with, Feldway would follow Rimuru's side's command. It was a completely one-sided, overbearing declaration. Before Feldway could even react, Rimuru began the treatment. The method was extremely, slime-like. Rimuru reverted one arm to slime form and simply swallowed Feldway whole. Inside Rimuru's body, Seal immediately began core repair and full physical reconstruction. This scene utterly broke Diablo. Diablo knew exactly what Rimuru-sama was doing, and he could not accept that the noble Rimuru-sama was using his precious slime cells to save an idiot like Feldway. In Diablo's mind, having Rimuru personally absorb such trash was nothing short of a desecration of his lord. Rimuru furiously complained internally, wondering since when he had ever been noble. Besides, this was all Seal's operation. He barely knew what was happening himself. Amid the chaos and Diablo's anguished wailing, the treatment finished almost instantly. Rimuru casually spat Feldway back out and tossed the fully restored Feldway onto the ground like discarded garbage. After saving Feldway, Rimuru tried to take charge of the situation. He attempted to rally morale, hoping to push everyone toward the idea of defeating even Veldanava together. The result was immediate. He was collectively ignored and roasted by everyone present. First was Luminous, who was furious that Rimuru had revived Feldway, someone even she could not revive. More accurately, she was projecting her frustration, completely unable to comprehend Rimuru's series of outrageous moves. This directly triggered the divine ancestor's research instincts. Rimuru felt deeply wronged, since this was obviously all Seal's doing. Velgrind muttered in visible displeasure, casting a sideways glance at Feldway. Dino, incredibly, used this moment to ask Rimuru whether he could be officially hired once everything was over. A level of audacity that left Pico and Grazia utterly stunned. Meanwhile, Veldora and Milim were still fighting Ivarage, getting beaten up while stubbornly insisting they were fine. In front of Rimuru, neither of them was willing to admit defeat. Rimuru, however, knew full well that Veldora could never bring himself to go all out against a woman, and that while Milim claimed she could still win if she got serious, she was in truth already riddled with damage. Rimuru looked at this group of teammates who could not reach any kind of consensus and felt utterly exhausted. Dealing with Ivarage alone was already this difficult, and now Veldanava was added on top. How was this fight even supposed to work? And right at that moment, he turned his head and noticed Guy and Velzard wearing identical, mischievous smiles. Whenever those two wore expressions like that, it never meant anything good. And sure enough, this time was no exception. Alright, that was all for this video. Before TenSura Volume 23 was released, many people debated how Feldway could possibly be redeemed. Back then, it felt like Feldway was already far too irredeemable. How could he possibly be whitewashed? The answer turned out to be very thoroughly. Almost no one expected Veldanava to fully revive, let alone in such a radically altered state. Feldway's transformation did feel a bit fast in execution, but logically it held together. The Veldanava he wanted to revive was the one from the past. Even if the soul was technically the same, a Veldanava who had lost love was no longer the same Veldanava. This directly echoed Luminous's viewpoint, discussed back in episode 151. The inability of true dragons to achieve perfect immortality was a fundamental flaw in the world's design. If Veldanava rebuilt the world now, that new world would inherit the same flaw, so destruction was not a solution. Dino's behavior made this even clearer. He was already worrying about his post-war employment, as if the destruction of the world had nothing to do with him at all. And that, in itself, showed Rimuru's position in everyone's hearts. As long as Rimuru was there, things would work out, even if the opponent was the creator god, Veldanava. As for Diablo, his exclusive privilege of being the only one to receive slime cells was no longer unique, and worse, it was shared with someone he utterly despised. His internal collapse was all but guaranteed. In our next episode, we would see Guy shamelessly dump the responsibility of fighting Veldanava onto Rimuru, as well as Feldway's battle against Veldanava, this time from Rimuru's perspective. More importantly, after Diablo and Feldway, yet another group would obtain the all-purpose slime cells, the three primordial demons everyone loves. The next episode would be released after Christmas, so it would be a bit shorter, giving me a short holiday as well. Of course, the next episode would still be just as exciting. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support was greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.